I stared at my inbox, the subject line blinking at me like a neon sign that mocked every ounce of hope I had left. Paris wedding, important info. My fingers hovered over the mouse, reluctant to click, yet unable to resist. My daughter, my little girl who once clung to my hand as we crossed crowded streets, who hid behind my legs when strangers frightened her, was getting married. And somehow, in all the planning, the excitement, and the months of her calls about dresses, flowers, and guest lists, I wasn't invited. I opened the email. There it was, concise, almost clinical in its cruelty. If you want to be part of it, you can watch through the Google Earth window, LOL. The words hit me like a slap. I felt the warmth in my chest drain, replaced by a cold, sharp ache. My own child, my flesh and blood, had chosen to exclude me from the most significant day of her life. Not a phone call, not a letter, not even a polite acknowledgement. Just a joke disguised as communication, a digital sneer at the love I had spent decades nurturing. I let my phone slip from my hands onto the couch beside me. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and took a slow, deliberate breath. I counted to 10. I counted again. Anger rose like a tidal wave, threatening to spill, but I held it back. This was not the moment for screams or tears. This was the moment for control. For strategy. For letting her reveal the true depth of her arrogance while I remained untouched. I thought back to when she was born. Tiny, fragile, perfect. I had stayed awake nights watching over her, monitoring her fever, wiping her tears, sacrificing sleep, comfort, even relationships, to ensure she had the life I hadn't been able to give myself. I had worked double shifts, skipped vacations, scrimped and saved, all so she could grow up with opportunities one only dreamed of. And now, the same daughter whose dreams I had funded was mocking me, telling me, in essence, that my presence wasn't necessary. And yet, I didn't write back in anger. I didn't send a long email detailing every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every quiet heartbreak. I typed a single line, measured, calm, unshakable, sure. Enjoy your big day. Nothing more. No anger, no begging, no tears. Just truth distilled into words she couldn't twist or attack. I poured myself a glass of wine and moved to the window. Outside, the city was waking up, unaware of my pain, unaware of the storm that had just passed in my chest. I opened Google Earth and found Paris. The Eiffel Tower glimmered like liquid gold, tiny streets winding around it, buildings glowing with lights. I imagined the ballroom she had chosen, the chandeliers casting soft glows, the guests laughing and dancing, none of them thinking about me. I traced her footsteps with my finger across the map, imagining the flowers, the music, the carefully planned moments I would never witness. And I smiled. Not in bitterness, but in quiet, profound clarity. This wasn't a defeat. This was an opportunity. An opening. Life stretches far beyond one wedding, one email, one slight. And sometimes, the most powerful lessons are taught not through confrontation, but through absence. I would let her believe she had won. And then, in time, she would learn that the strongest influence is often invisible, silent, and unyielding. I raised my glass to the window, to Paris, to her big day. Enjoy your wedding, I whispered, savoring the calm certainty of someone who had learned to endure betrayal without losing herself. The day was hers, but life, in its long, patient way, was mine. The morning sun filtered through my kitchen window, painting golden streaks across the countertops, but it did nothing to warm the chill in my chest. My phone vibrated insistently on the table, the screen flashing a name I knew too well, my daughter. I could practically hear her excitement and panic vibrating through the tiny device. She had been calling all night, but I had let it go to voicemail, savoring the quiet that her absence afforded me. The first message was breathless, almost frantic. Mom. Why didn't you say anything? You're not even watching? I don't understand. You can't just ignore me. I didn't flinch. I didn't pick up. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness settle in my mouth as my mind wandered. I pictured her in Paris, the lace of her gown brushing against marble floors, her laughter echoing off crystal chandeliers, all while I remained a ghost, silently observing from thousands of miles away. She had believed she could provoke me, push me into panic or tears. She had underestimated the depth of my restraint, the patience I had honed over decades of challenges and betrayals. Her calls kept coming, one after the other, each more desperate than the last. "Mom, please, pick up. I don't get it. I thought you'd want to see it. I need you." I allowed the ringing to continue, letting it build a symphony of her desperation. There was power in silence, a quiet authority that no shouted plea could break. I wasn't ignoring her because I was angry, I was ignoring her because I was free. Free from manipulation, free from expectation, free from the illusion that her happiness dictated my presence. Instead of answering, I focused on my own morning routine. Emails, work calls, planning sessions, I threw myself into tasks that mattered, that shaped my life rather than bending to hers. For years, I had stitched lives back together as a professional, mending broken people with steady hands and clear minds. Now, I was weaving my own reality, a reality in which her mockery and exclusion had no power. Every so often, I glanced at Google Earth. The Eiffel Tower glistened, tiny streets unfolding like threads of silver. I imagined the reception, the guests, the carefully orchestrated moments she had worked so hard to perfect, moments from which I was absent. And I smiled, not in bitterness, not in revenge yet, but in a quiet, knowing way. She thought her exclusion mattered. She thought she had won. And yet, she had revealed her arrogance, her immaturity, her inability to value the people who loved her. I allowed myself a thought, a simple truth I relished: absence can be more powerful than presence. She had called repeatedly, begged and pleaded, yet I had remained unmoved. Life continued for me, rich and full, while her world, constructed on exclusion and entitlement, had no control over me. I was everywhere and nowhere, invisible yet omnipresent, a constant reminder that my influence did not require her acknowledgement. By midday, the frantic calls had slowed. The desperation in her voice had begun to crack, the certainty she had once held now shaken. And I, calm and resolute, sipped my coffee again, content in the quiet knowledge that the first ripple of my subtle, sweet revenge had begun. She would learn, slowly, painfully, that underestimating someone who knows her own worth is a dangerous mistake. I watched the sunlight shift across my kitchen and whispered to myself, a soft smile tugging at my lips, "Enjoy your big day." I'm doing the same. Weeks slipped by like whispered secrets. Paris faded from my screens, yet the memory of that cruel email, the image of her smug little laugh, remained vivid in my mind. It was a memory that demanded action, but not rash action. My revenge, if it could even be called that, wouldn't be loud or spiteful. It would be quiet, deliberate, woven into the very fabric of the life she had tried to exclude me from. I began with subtle, almost invisible steps. Mutual friends who had once turned to me for advice now found themselves included in small, meaningful ways in my life. Invitations to gatherings I arranged, events that I hosted, moments that carried the weight of my presence without her awareness. I dropped hints about my contributions to her upbringing in casual conversation, stories of long nights, missed meals, and empty wallets, shared in rooms she might overhear, but never directly addressed to her. It was a gentle assertion of fact, a quiet reminder that she could never erase the years I had devoted to her. I leveraged my independence next, a tool she had overlooked in her arrogance. The wedding she had planned had cost me, yes, but I had the means to ensure that every future claim of dependence or entitlement would become hers to reconsider. Investments, legal adjustments, and careful financial maneuvering, all orchestrated to remind her, subtly, that money and power can shift quietly, almost invisibly, but with undeniable impact. She had believed her exclusion meant freedom from me, and yet, in the ways that truly mattered, I remained a quiet force she could not control. At the same time, I nurtured my own life with deliberate care. I traveled, I explored, I reconnected with passions I had put aside for years while raising her. Each new experience, each moment of joy and accomplishment, was a small, unspoken testament to my strength. I wasn't plotting destruction or humiliation, I was cultivating a life so full, so unapologetically rich, that her attempts at diminishing me would feel inconsequential. The satisfaction came not from revenge itself, but from her gradual realization that my absence was not weakness. Each time I heard a report from friends, subtle hints of her confusion, the questioning of her friends and colleagues, the whispered wonder at how her mother seemed unaffected by exclusion, I allowed myself a quiet, imperceptible smile. She was beginning to understand that my influence had never depended on her permission. She had underestimated me, and that mistake, once tiny, was rippling through her carefully constructed world. I spent evenings reflecting on the irony. I had once held her close, guided her, sacrificed everything for her happiness. And now, I had the upper hand not through confrontation or anger, but through restraint, patience, and quiet action. She had shown me the power of absence, the power to teach, to correct, and to remind without uttering a single word. And slowly, without her even realizing it, I had begun to shape her understanding of me, of respect, and of the consequences of dismissing someone who had given everything. By the time I set my glass of wine on the table, the city around me alive with its usual hum, I felt a calm certainty. My revenge would not be dramatic. It would not be seen coming. And when it arrived, it would be undeniable. Not because I had shouted, not because I had raged, but because life itself, orchestrated quietly, was bending to show her the truth. The truth that I had always been there, that I always would be, and that underestimating me had been her gravest mistake. Months passed in a quiet, deliberate rhythm. Life continued in all its fullness around me, rich and unyielding, while Paris, the wedding, the laughter, the drama, slowly became a memory I observed rather than a wound I carried. My daughter's fleeting attempts at connection had dwindled over time, each call more hesitant, more uncertain than the last. And finally, the inevitable arrived, a call that trembled with a mixture of guilt, confusion, and fear. Her voice, once confident and teasing, now sounded smaller, almost tentative. "Mom. I didn't expect. I didn't think. I'm sorry." The words stumbled over themselves, as though her mouth were trying to catch up to the realization dawning in her mind. She had thought she could push me, provoke me, and control the narrative of our relationship through exclusion and mockery. She had underestimated me. She had assumed my silence was weakness, my absence emptiness, and now she was discovering the consequences of that assumption. I didn't interrupt. I let her stumble through her thoughts, let her weigh each word against the stark reality she had created. In my mind, I revisited every moment she had taken for granted, the nights I had stayed awake while she dreamed, the sacrifices I had quietly shouldered, the love I had given unconditionally while she focused on the trappings of her own life. And then, with calm authority, I spoke. "I'm glad you're happy." "Truly," I said, my voice steady, measured, full of the quiet power that had always defined me. "But understand this, life doesn't forget who built it. You cannot erase the years, the care, or the sacrifices. You may try to exclude people from moments, but respect and love are not optional. They are earned, and sometimes, they are recognized in ways you cannot control." There was silence on the other end. A pause so long it felt almost tangible, a space in which she digested the weight of my words. And in that silence, I knew she had understood. Perhaps for the first time, she grasped the subtle power of absence, the quiet authority of a life lived fully and on one's own terms. She had mocked me, excluded me, and assumed my love would bend to her whims. And yet, I had remained steadfast, unshaken, untouchable, not because I wanted vengeance, but because I valued myself enough to let life itself convey the lesson. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quieter, less assured. I didn't realize. I was wrong." I allowed myself a small, serene smile. There was no triumph in shouting, no satisfaction in anger, only the deep, resonant truth of someone who had been underestimated for too long. My revenge was not in confrontation, it was in living fully, decisively, beautifully, while she learned the hard way what true strength looked like. I hung up the phone, feeling the calm satisfaction of someone who had not been broken, who had not begged or pleaded, and who had quietly reclaimed her power. The Paris wedding, with all its glamour and spectacle, had been hers. But the life I had built, the influence I had never surrendered, and the subtle correction of her arrogance, that was mine. I poured a glass of wine, raised it to the empty room, and whispered, a soft smile curling my lips, enjoy your big day. And this time, the words were not for her, they were a celebration of me.